Hi, everyone. Hi to everyone joining in. Just for everyone who is just logging in, maybe we can start in 5 minutes, if that's all right. I think participants are just joining in. So we'll start in 5 minutes. Yeah, I think we're good to start. All right. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Naresh from Bridge. I will be a moderator for the evening. Just to set things in context, Bridge, we have a vision to assist in the modernization and technology transformation of Sri Lanka. We bring long-standing industry experience, strong partner network, and also unique skill set in the domains of digital assets, fintech, and blockchain technology. We help business leaders develop deep insights into the needs of tomorrow's customers, aligned around a shared vision of the future, enabling a pathway to transform both government and enterprises into the new economy. By 2024, the global spending on digital transformation will exceed nearly 2.4 trillion USD. And by 2023, the digitally transformed organizations are expected to contribute more than half of the global GDP. However, researchers do show that only 8% of the global companies have achieved their targeted business outcomes for their investment in digital technology, which means nearly 90% of companies still struggle to live up to the promise of a technological business model. And one of the critical elements that must be a part of digital transformation is e-signatures. This brings me to our topic of discussion for today, electronic signatures and agreement cloud and its relevance to Sri Lanka. The global market size in e-signatures is set to about 3.79 billion USD in 2021 and is expected to grow to about 5.10 billion this year, 2022, and is also expected to grow to 15.6 billion USD by 2026. This is the size of the market in terms of the total digital e-signature space around the world. And Asia Pacific has seen quite an aggressive adaptation of digital technologies, especially in the e-signature side, where we see companies taking use of e-signatures to benefit from cost saving, time saving, productivity boost, and overall increase of customer experience across their organizations. With this in mind, I would like to introduce to you our distinguished panel of speakers for the evening, starting off with Mr. Jayantha Fernando, Director SL CERT and General Counsel from the ICTA. Mr. Fernando is a founder director of Sri Lanka CERT and has served as its chairman. He has over 20 years international and Southeast Asian experience in a broad range of ICT legal and policy issues. He's an attorney by profession with a specialized master's degree in law, in telecommunications and IT law. He pioneered drafting several legislations impacting digital transformation, including the Electronics Act, transactions, digital and mobile payments, cybercrime, cybersecurity, and data protection. He gave leadership to Sri Lanka's entry into the Budapest Cybercrime Convention in 2015, and the UN Electronic Communications Convention, both firsts for South Asia. Mr. Jayantha continues to work with policymakers to drive digital transformation across Sri Lanka. We also like to welcome Mr. Revan Weerasinghe, attorney at law. Revan is an independent legal practitioner specializing in the areas of intellectual property, information security, data protection, company law, and commercial transactions. Apart from functioning as an advocate in court, he consults to several companies and startups on intellectual property strategy and information security best practices. He's a consultant legal and intellectual property to the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology for over 13 years. He also heads compliance at daraz.lk, one of the largest e-commerce platforms in Sri Lanka. We'd also like to invite Mr. Wilson O, the Channel Research Director of Asia for Docusign. Wilson has built a strong partner network and ISV ecosystem to drive successful adoption of Docusign Agreement Cloud across the region. With a strong channel management and customer-focused approach, he has helped many partners and clients in different industries like FSI, high-tech, education, telco, and many large enterprises to accelerate their digital strategy, to provide a better client engagement experience, reduced operating costs, and improving security and compliance. And finally, we have Mr. Randall Boteju, Senior Vice President, Sales and Digital Banking from Nations Trust Bank. A long-standing member of the dynamic team at Nations Trust Bank, Randil was among the initial group of pioneers who championed the bank's efforts to become the single largest issuer of cards in Sri Lanka. In this endeavor, he has also spearheaded the research, development, and implementation of a wide variety of pioneering initiatives and firsts for Sri Lanka. In his present role as a Senior Vice President, Sales and Digital Banking, Randil is also responsible for growing the bank's digital footprint. And without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Jayantha for the first topic, which is the setting up the background and legality of e-signatures in Sri Lanka. Mr. Fernando, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Naresh. Am I being heard?
Yes, Mr. Fernando, we can hear you.
Yeah. Just let me upload my slides. So yeah, so thank you very much, Naresh and the team, for inviting me. I'm also delighted to be joined by old friend and colleague in Revan, and I'm delighted to see him also taking part here. Many of your faces are relatively new, but I'm delighted that in these challenging times, efforts are being made to enlighten stakeholders and the public about various dimensions on digital law standards that have been adopted, which can be used to harness the potential of our economy, however bad it may be impacted, for a resurgence, renewal, or kickstarting opportunities that need to be made use of, can be done through a new wave of activity, making use of some of the digital enablers that we have put in place. I have put up a few slides together, and I'll try to be limit myself to the time allocated. In terms of the digital transactions legal ecosystem, we all know there are many parties involved. I have just identified 3 commonly known parties: the business, consumers, government. Governments provide services both to businesses and consumers. Same with businesses providing services to consumers while they have to pay taxes and need to interact with government. In this triangular equation, often connecting one with each other in different ways and means. I have just put out something out there here just for illustration. What is important is that in this 3-way or multiple way relationships, we need to have some kind of common legal norms and standards. Setting a common legal standards for digital transactions have been a subject of discussion for many years. It started off with this soft law
Mr. Fernando,
body.
yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah. So UNCITRAL stands for United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, established long years ago in the 1960s as an international body under the United Nations umbrella with a mandate to formulate trade law and related standards. So they developed the standards for arbitration, for international procurement, cross-border insolvency, and a number of other areas, including electronic commerce. Electronic commerce is led by its working group 4, and one of their first adventures was to embark on the development of an instrument which became a model law. We call it a model law because it did not have binding legal effect on state parties and countries to adopt. So we could see some countries adopting a higher standard, some countries adopting the same standard, or in many instances adopting lower standards. And that resulted in different countries having different models being adopted in terms of international electronic commerce, digital commerce, legal standards. And there was no harmonization between countries, which impacted the growth of electronic commerce globally. One problem in the lack of harmonization was what was done in one country would not be accepted in another country, and vice versa. And that led to a clash which impacted international electronic commerce, and thus being an impediment for the growth of international trade. Same was true with regard to the adoption of electronic signatures and standards related to that. There was no uniform applicability of electronic signature legal standards under the model law, and that also became a barrier because there was no mutual legal assistance, mutual legal recognition of electronic signature standard in one country being recognized in another country. That also became a barrier to the growth of international trade. So the response was that the United Nations General Assembly mooted a proposal and requested United Nations Commission on we had to reach a kind of consensus between common law, civil law kind of countries. However, we reached agreement, and then we adopted a kind of a uniform standard that was approved by the United Nations General Assembly, which is now known as the Electronic Commerce Law 2.0, which is the international gold standard governing this subject area. And it has been in place it has mechanisms for automated contracts without human intervention being recognized, not necessarily smart contracts, but something in between. Then providing for cross-border recognition of electronic signatures, and then permitting various systems, automated systems between countries to connect with each other in a seamless fashion. So this became very novel at that time, and many countries started adopting that instrument. So Sri Lanka, having taken part in the negotiation along with Singapore and many other countries, were one of the early adopters of this standard. And slowly but surely, many countries are now getting there. Australia, the instrument is before Senate. US, all 50 states have amended their domestic contract laws, and the instrument is now before the Senate. So at any time soon, they will be ratifying this instrument. Sri Lanka, we have one country, one parliament. As such, it was easier for us to process this. And Sri Lanka eventually became adopted straightforward in relation to electronic signatures. The applicable law is the Electronic Transactions Act number 19 of 2006. Revan will give a lot of practical perspectives from a practitioner's perspective, but I just want to highlight that from a policy standpoint and international law standpoint, it adopts the features of that model law and the gold standard which I mentioned earlier, which is the UN Electronic Communications Convention that Sri Lanka onboarded in 2015. It became effective on Sri Lanka from 1st of February 2016, and many countries now are following suit. And the applicable law that brought this whole new standard into domestic application was the Electronic Transactions Amendment Act number 25 of 2017. As a result, Sri Lanka has become a reference point for legislative reforms connected with digital transactions in Ghana, Rwanda, Costa Rica, Fiji, Philippines, to name a few. So the Electronic Transactions Act provides for a facilitation framework where the formation of contracts as well as creation and exchange of instruments known as data messages, electronic documents, electronic records, and other instruments are legally valid. The second part of this long title describes the governing framework we have to ensure common standards being applied in the use of electronic signatures, digital signing methods. So this law has been in place for some time. It applies for all transactions except for those which have been excluded in the Electronic Transactions Act, which requires physical verification, example, last wills, power of attorneys, transfer of movable property deeds, etc. Those things are excluded for very good reason, but it has application and cuts across all other laws which require writing and signing obligations imposed through various statutes. So, in short, this law is all-encompassing. It has provisions that overrides other laws, giving legal recognition to electronic equivalence of a writing and for the information contained in a data message, electronic document, electronic record, etc. I have highlighted the fact that this is a law that also provides for the legal recognition of electronic signatures. It also facilitates electronic government and sets the standards for electronic contracts to take place and what kind of default rules can be adopted by contracting parties to enable recognition between each other, including in an automated contract scenario which does not require human intervention. So on the electronic signature recognition, I just want to highlight a few aspects, namely that section 7, which was amended by Act number 25 of 2017, ensures a technology neutral frontier for our electronic in our Electronic Transactions Act, ensuring that various categories of electronic signature standards would be given legal validity and legal effect, provided that the method used would identify a party involved and the method is reliable as appropriate for the purpose for which that communication was generated or communicated, taking into consideration various other circumstances that my colleague would touch on. So in short, we have various categories of electronic signatures, PIN numbers, QR codes, biometrics, scan signatures can all come within that concept of an electronic signature, and given legal validity through the electronic transmissibility of recognizing a higher standard, namely digital signing methods, digital sign signatures issued by a certificate service provider, a CSP, that is licensed or authorized within the framework of the Electronic Transactions Act. So that framework for recognition of a certificate service provider under our law is prescribed in the provisions which I mentioned. Sri Lanka's CERT functions as the operational body for that function with a task force layer on top of it. I will not go into details of that. In conclusion, I just want to highlight that Sri Lanka has so far authorized one provider with a link to the root certificate that was launched in 2020 on Valentine's Day 2020. However, you can see with that many organizations onboarding digital signing methods, and Colombo Stock Exchange being a more recent example. And with that, we saw a growing pattern of usage, a growing resurgence of usage across Sri Lanka with regard to electronic and digital transactions methods. But I just need to emphasize that a broad range of electronic signature standards would be legally valid, provided they fit into the framework of the definition illustrated under section 7, read with the definition of electronic signature that ensures technology neutrality in our Electronic Transactions Act. So with that note, I thank you, Naresh and the team for inviting me, and I am available for any Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando. Thank you for that insightful input on the legal side of it, the cross-border side of it, information and views that we are hearing for the first time actually on some of those points. Moving on, I would like to invite Revan to perhaps extend from that point, from taking it off from Mr. Fernando as to maybe explaining a bit more about the act itself and why electronic signatures should be a commonality in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Revan. Revan, you'll have to unmute yourself, please. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to give this presentation to all of you, especially following Mr. Fernando and his footsteps, which are big shoes to follow. So I'm going to touch on e-signatures and its relevance, especially at the current juncture that we're all going through, because these are tough times, as we all know, right? And things have come to a grinding halt in most sense. So, so has transactions, so has client meetings, so has business in a sense. So I think the relevance of e-signatures today is far more than ever before. And let me go into that. First of all, please excuse me if there's a drop in signal. The electricity in my building has gone off, so I'm using my mobile to power this presentation. So what I'm going to talk about is specifically why e-signatures, its relevance, and then we'll go into the specific provisions of e-signatures in the course of my presentation. So I think in this current juncture, I'd like to start with this point. We are going through, especially where businesses in Sri Lanka are concerned, we are going through 3 storms. I think the first storm is almost over. Then there is, we've started on the second storm, which I will elaborate further into. And then there might be a third storm, which is happening as we speak. The storms that I talk about are very familiar to all of us, but it has changed our business landscape. It has changed the way people do business. It has changed the way people relate to each other, meet with each other. The pace of business has come to a grinding halt, should I say. Everyone in a diesel queue or a petrol queue would be able to elaborate on that as to what's happening in Sri Lanka. So the first storm that I think we are going through and has, like I said, hopefully come to an end has been COVID-19. But as you know, during COVID-19, doing business was very hard. Meeting with people was very hard. Signing documents was a nightmare. And I'm telling you that as a lawyer. Getting signatures on documents was a nightmare, and you know, especially even things like leases and all, where for businesses to start, there was a need to get those signatures done on the date, but it was very, very difficult to do. COVID-19 changed the way people do business. You found school kids adopting Zoom. You found business as it is changed altogether. The second storm is what we're going through at the moment, which is a severe economic downturn and an economic crisis that's happening in Sri Lanka. Now I need not elaborate on this. We all know what's happening at the ground level. We've all been in petrol queues. We've all been in gas queues. My electricity has gone off in my building at the moment. So these are the birth pangs of this crisis that's hitting us at the moment. So with that comes a severe economic downturn, rising unemployment, drying up of liquidity, low consumer, you know, the list goes on, right? Low investment, the list goes on. But business has to go on if we are to weather this storm. People need to adopt, people need to be more innovative. People need to be more dynamic. Business needs to happen. So which is why I think there's a need for the Electronic Transactions Act even more than ever before, especially with regards to creating evidence, signing agreements, entering into transactions, the list goes on and on. The third storm is with regards to what may or may not happen to Sri Lanka, but I think it's slowly but swiftly happening, is having a level of irrelevance in the marketplace, especially in terms of the goods and services that we offer. We find that a lot of our products are getting outpriced by countries such as China and India. And there's a need for Sri Lanka to be more relevant and bring more better produce, more innovative solutions, more value-added products to the marketplace. So in light of these three storms, how do we move forward? Like I said, business has to take place. And I'd say the solution to that, and it has always been the solution, it's to think more innovatively, more inventively, reinvent the way we do business, reinvent the way we deal with people, reinvent the way business occurs, should I say. And in line with that background, I'd like to discuss e-signatures and its importance. Because as a lawyer, I'll tell you, transactions need to take place for business to take place. Business is, the law of contract is essentially the law of business, because if you look at our day-to-day workings in the marketplace, it's always a case of entering into a contract, offer and acceptance. That's the basis of business. It's someone makes an offer, someone accepts that offer, and business goes on. Agreements. So in the light of that, I think it's more important than ever before to work faster, especially given the fact that we're going through this economic crisis, to enter into agreements faster, to reduce the time span that's taken into contracting. And to ensure that that happens, we have the Electronic Transactions Act. But you know what people say about invention, necessity is the mother of invention. And at the moment, Sri Lanka is going through a time of necessity. So I'd say it's more relevant than ever before for Sri Lankans to look at innovative acts like the Electronic Transactions Act to be able to enter into agreements faster and faster. Because as a lawyer, it is unfortunate how long sometimes transactions take. But that has got simplified with some of the inventive steps that lawyers are taking these days. For example, negotiating over Zoom. I'd say gone are the days where people spend hours transacting from, going from one place to another, and sending one draft over and over, up and down to other parties. Now, a lot of negotiations are done via Zoom, where both parties, they go through the draft. Zoom has facilitated that. So similarly, the Electronic Transactions Act enables people to sign on the dotted line and people to enter into agreements that are valid and validated before law. So now let's go into the Act. Mr. Fernando gave a very well-constructed background to the Act. And I'd like to take it from there. So if you read the recital to the Act sets out, the recital sets out the need for this Act and its relevance today. So it says an Act to recognize and facilitate the formation of contracts, the creation and exchange of data messages, electronic documents, electronic records, and other communications in electronic form in Sri Lanka. So let's stop there for the moment because we're on the subject of e-signatures. So electronic documents, electronic records, and other communications are to be recognized as a form of evidence. So it's reduced the cumbersome nature of producing this evidence before court as a result of the Electronic Transactions Act. So let's look at the objectives of this Act. It's essentially to promote efficiency. The objectives of this act shall be to facilitate domestic and international electronic commerce by eliminating legal barriers and establishing legal certainty. I will explain how this happens in the course of my presentation. To encourage the use of reliable forms of electronic commerce, to facilitate electronic filing of documents with government, and to promote efficient delivery of government services by means of reliable forms of electronic communications, and to promote public confidence in the authenticity, integrity, and reliability of data messages, electronic documents, electronic records, or other communications. Let's talk about electronic contracts, e-contracts. And I'd say that's the background to anything to do with e-signatures. In the context of, so section 11 sets out the basis on acceptance of electronic contracts. Acceptance in law before the judges and before parties. Section 11 says, in the context of contract formation, unless otherwise agreed by the parties, an offer and the acceptance of an offer may be expressed in electronic form. It may be expressed in electronic form. A contract shall not be denied legal validity or the enforceability on the sole ground that it is in electronic form. So there is acceptance of electronic contracts by virtue of law. So I'd say that's a big step up in giving validity to e-contracts. Not a big step up. This is outright giving validity to e-contracts by an act of parliament. The law further says, no data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication shall be denied legal recognition, effect, validity, or enforceability on the grounds that it is in electronic form. So it goes on to say data message is a part of, will have enforceability of law. An electronic document will have enforceability of law. An electronic record will similarly have the same, or any other communication is accepted before the law. And now we come to the subject of electronic signatures, and where the Act gives recognition to electronic signatures. Section 7 says, where any act or enactment provides that any information or communication shall be authenticated by affixing the signature, or that any document should be signed or bear the signature of any person, then notwithstanding anything contained in such law, such requirement shall be deemed to be satisfied if such information or matter is authenticated by means of an electronic signature. Right? So e-signatures themselves are considered as a tool to authenticate documents. Such requirement shall be deemed to be satisfied. The requirement of a signature shall be deemed to be satisfied. I'll just read that again so it's clear. Where any act or enactment provides that any information or communication shall be authenticated by affixing a person's signature, or that document should be signed or bear the signature of any person, then notwithstanding anything contained in such law, such requirement shall be deemed to be satisfied if such information or matter is authenticated by means of e-signature, electronic signature. That goes into validation. It gives the required acceptance in law of an electronic signature. So that's the basis of any transactions where you need to authenticate it by way of a signature. The law says it would be valid. Then we go to section 17. Might make a clarification on section 7, which I just spoke about at the panel discussion. Section 17 further speaks about e-signatures. It says, for the avoidance of doubt, so for the clarification, if an acceptance of an offer has been in whole or in part expressed by means of an electronic record, an electronic signature attached to or logically associated with such electronic record shall not be denied legal effect solely on the grounds that it is with an electronic signature. So essentially, this once again buttresses the whole point of an electronic signature, that it is valid as a conclusion to a transaction. Section B says, if an electronic communication is used in the formation of a contract, the contract shall not be denied validity or enforceability solely on the ground that an electronic record had been used for such purpose. The accepted principles of common law relating to contracts that the offerer may prescribe the method of communicating acceptance shall not be affected by anything contained in this chapter. A contract formed by the interaction of an automated message system and a natural person, or by the interaction of automated system, shall not be denied validity or enforceability solely on the ground that there was no review or intervention by a natural. So essentially, e-signatures have now, as per the Electronic Transactions Act, has the same validity as a signature on the dotted line. And these documents are accepted and can be produced for court. I just want to, the law attributes certain presumptions to e-signatures, which I think is also very relevant in proving the validity of an e-signature. So I'd say it's very important to understand section 12 and the presumption there, because this would be the basis of your of understanding the validity of the document. It says, section 12.1 says, unless otherwise agreed as between an originator and the addressee, a data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication shall be deemed to be from that originator if it was sent by the originator. The law recognizes a presumption that this electronic transaction was sent by the originator if it was sent by the originator, or by a person who had the authority to act for and on behalf of the originator in respect of that data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication, or by an automated information system programmed by or on behalf of the originator. For example, if you are contracting with an e-commerce site and you get an automated message from that e-commerce site, if it originated from that e-commerce site, there is a presumption that, or it's more than a presumption, it shall be deemed to be sent from that e-commerce site or from that originator. So I'd say this is a very important section that you need to keep in mind when dealing with e-signatures and e-documents. That goes on to say further, unless otherwise agreed as between the originator and the addressee is to regard a data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication as being that of that originator and is entitled to act on that assumption if the addressee has no reason to doubt the authenticity of the data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication. Or there do not exist any circumstances where the addressee knows or ought to have known by exercising reasonable care that the data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication was authentic. So there is an acceptance of an e-document to be valid and from the source if all these points line up, that there is no reason to doubt the authenticity of the electronic document or electronic record, or there doesn't exist any circumstances by which the addressee, the person to whom it's sent, doubts or reasonably suspects the validity of the message or document. There do not exist any circumstances where the addressee knows or ought to have known by exercising reasonable care that the data, message, electronic document, electronic record, or the communication was authentic. Now the test there is reasonable care. Have we taken reasonable care as lawyers to see that these documents that have actually come from the person from which we are transacting? And I think that is a very valid point that one should take home, that just as much as there is the Electronic Transactions Act, which protect you and validates a contract and deems that contract to be accurate, as you need to take reasonable care to ascertain the veracity and validity of a document, to see that it is not sent by a third party, that it is indeed sent by the person who originated the document. It is good at all times to communicate with that person to see, did you send this document for my e-signature? So that generally happens by way of the transaction, but it's always good to take reasonable care before accepting such a document. And I think there is a lot of technology now that has been built to enable and to ensure the veracity of documents are maintained, because the Act doesn't necessarily build in the safety features that technology does. The Act, however, gives the legal validity in terms of evidence for these legal documents and legal messages and legal records. So I'll answer any questions at the end of the presentation, panel discussion.
Excellent.
Over to you, Naresh.
Thank you, Revan. Thank you so much. I think you cleared the air on many doubts that most organizations, individuals have on the laws and the regulations. I think it's quite insightful. Thank you very much for that. We will definitely take a few questions. And as you rightly touched on the technology, which plays a huge role in terms of this entire ecosystem. Going into that, I would like to introduce Wilson, and for Wilson to take on and to talk about DocuSign and how they have grown in terms of a company, in terms of looking at all of these security aspects, the risk aspects of e-signatures, and how they've built that into DocuSign. Over to you, Wilson.
Hey, thanks, Naresh. First of all, I want to thank Revan and Mr. Jayantha to share about the legality aspect of e-signature, and also why e-signature is important in this economy. So in fact, I'll be focusing on how the industry has been working with DocuSign to drive the adoption of e-signatures as well as e-contracting, right? So I just want to do a quick introduction. I'll be myself. I've been with DocuSign for slightly more than 6 years. So I have the opportunity to work with the various certificate authority across ASEAN, in China, in India, in Sri Lanka as well, to address some of the local legality concern. And a few years ago, when Singapore government started to drive this Smart Nation initiative, and paperless economy, in fact, is one of the key pillar. So I have the opportunity to work with the Singapore regulator as well as the Singapore National CA to build solutions to drive adoption in Singapore as well, right? So for those that who have heard about DocuSign, some may not. I will just give a quick overview about who is DocuSign, what we do, and of course, why a lot of our customers adopting DocuSign, and what is the value proposition to the organization. And also I will cover a bit about how organization, whether in commercial and regulated industry, are using DocuSign, and what kind of use cases. And specifically, I will bring up 2 case study, right? One in insurance, one in real estate, right? Why they use DocuSign. In fact, they adopted at a peak of COVID in 2020 when there's a massive lockdown, right? Yeah, so DocuSign, we've been around more than 20 years, right? We are the strongest market leader in the e-signature space. Today, we already have more than 1 million paying customers, right, subscribing to our platform. But we have few hundred million users who have ever used DocuSign to sign document. And that's the reason why a lot of companies where they have a lot of international trade, international transaction, they are using DocuSign, right? Because we are the widest adopted and most trusted platform globally, right? And we really have helped many of organizations, right, to drive e-signature or e-contracts across various departments. It can be their customer facing, for example, the sales agreement. And depending on the industry, right, for banks, it could be customer onboarding, credit card applications, right? For insurance, it can be a policy distribution, policy acknowledgements kind of use case, right? And of course, every company have a corporate functions. So we also have helped them to drive the digital services in HR, where they can use e-signature for their offer letter and a new employee onboarding process. And obviously, procurement is a large part of all the corporate functions, right? So we have customers that are using DocuSign for their supplier onboarding, for their supplier agreement as well. And obviously, legal have a lot of contracts, be it the NDA, their board resolutions, right? All those corporate functions where they need to have a lot of, they are managing a lot of contracts, right? So we have worked with customers and departments across all these functions. But obviously, not every company have already adopted e-signature or digitized their contract process. So you can see a lot of them still relying on courier service, printing, faxing, and a lot of human intervention, right? So you can see in the manual contract process, there are a lot of disjointed process and also a lot of human intervention, which resulted in some of the common pain point, right? First is that the operating cost is very high, right? Some of the cost component are example just now I talked about the courier service, even the transportation cost, right? Even you deliver yourself, you still spend time and money as well. And of course, the human productivity cost, because you need to extract data manually, key into the system. And of course, even you need space to keep all these paper contracts, right? These are all the overhead of the operating cost. And second is also slow, right? Before our customers adopted e-signatures, they can be taking days or sometimes even weeks, right? So speed it's like a blood to the business. So today, everybody wants the service fast. So this is a key hurdles to the business if they're still relying on manual contracts. And third is really the customer experience. Today, everyone wants to get a service online. I want to get my service using mobile phone, using my notebook, right? So by giving them a digital service, you can really impact and improve the customer experience. And last but not least, right, because if you are not using a proper e-signature platform, you're just relying on fax or scanning of documents, there's no proper audit trail, right? So this will present a potential compliance risk to the organization. And this is where DocuSign comes in, right? So DocuSign, we have a suite of platform solution as well as integration. We call it DocuSign Agreement Cloud, right? That will cut across the whole spectrum of the contract process, right? So we have a platform that the legal team, they can use it to standardize the legal clauses. You can use it to invite internal, external party to do negotiation of the contracts. And of course, after everyone agreed on the final approved contracts, this is where our e-signature platform comes in. And particularly, we are very strong in the identity verification during the signing process. And after the contract is signed, it is not end of the process. We allow the customers to integrate with their internal system to trigger the next business process. For example, if it is an insurance policy, you can trigger a payment collection immediately. If it is a supplier contract, you can trigger the supplier chain to order raw material required, right? And of course, after that, you can push the document back into your own ERP system, your finance system, and then you can have a records, right, of all the signed contract within your platform itself. Okay. And like I mentioned, we've been doing this for over 20 years. We have so many customers. We have a lot of data points about the benefits for our client, right? First is that based on our statistics, more than 80% of our customer contract can be completed within 1 day, right? And on the average, they can save about $36. Of course, this is really depending on the type of agreement, right? Obviously, a sales agreement has a higher business value to the organization comparing to other process. And of course, it's also depending on the local cost structure as well, right? But for some of our very large organization where they have large volume, we do have a process called value engineering, where we can work with their transformation officer, the CFO, or the chief procurement officer to work out a business case of what is the ROI that they can achieve. And all the transactions done through our platform, there is a proper audit trail, right? There's proper authentication of the signer, and then all the document is like a tamper-proof, right? So with all this in place, right, we have to ensure like to reduce the operation and compliance risk for the organization. Like I mentioned, right now you are giving your customer a digital experience. This will definitely improve your customer engagement and customer loyalty and engagement with you, right? Like I mentioned, like we already service organization across all different industry. These are just some example, and I want to highlight that like we are specifically very entrenched in those regulated industry. Like we have a lot of organization in the healthcare, in the life science, where they're using it for like the clinical trial, patient consent, right? Because of some like the FDA requirement, right? So we do have certification for that. For banking, right, same thing. Like there are a lot of like a stringent security compliance. They're very stringent like authentication process for the user, right? So all this we have in place. Same for insurance, and as well as the real estate as well, right? So like in Singapore, we have like real estate company using DocuSign for their sales process as well, right? So this is just some like some of our clients across the region in Asia, right? So particularly, I will just want to highlight we have customer in the public education. But NUS is the largest largest like a university in Singapore, right? They set out the center of excellence and then drive DocuSign across e-signature across all the different schools, different departments, right? From the student accommodation, the student scholarship, all those process. Also, we have like even like a water utility. We have the banks. We have like a sovereign fund, right? So this is the largest sovereign fund in Malaysia. We have stock exchanges. Yeah, so across, right? So we have like a lifestyle, like I mentioned, right? So later we'll cover a bit why all this regulated industry are using DocuSign as well. Yeah, so specifically, I want to touch on about like a 2 case study, right? I believe you all will heard about Prudential, right? So in the peak of the COVID in 2020, right, there's a massive lockdown across the region, and Prudential, their agents, right, they have to use like a Zoom or other conference solutions to discuss the policy detail with their client. But after that, they will need to use courier service to send the document over, right? So obviously there'll be a few issues that they face. First is that the customer sometimes will complain that like they never received the documents, and then the agent had to spend money to send the document again, right? And sometimes the customer, even they will take time to review the document after like a couple of weeks, and then you have to keep chasing them and finally return the document. So this is very inefficient. And that's the reason that like Prudential partnered with DocuSign in 2020 to drive like adoption of like e-signature across all their agent, right? So in fact, this is a screenshot I captured from their YouTube channel where they have created a video to guide their agent how to use DocuSign to send, like for this example, a business customer acknowledgement form, right? For those that who have not seen our platform, in fact, it's very easy, right? You just need to log into our platform, you upload the document, you create a signing flow, right? Who is the first signer, who is the second signer, you indicate where you need to capture some data, where you need to capture the signature, right? And DocuSign will do the rest for you, okay? And second is like CapitaLand. CapitaLand is one of the largest real estate company in Singapore, right? They have like business across like 230 cities, right? Same thing at the peak of the pandemic. They have problem like meeting their client, meeting their internal stakeholder to sign the document. Examples like the leasing agreement, the board resolution. As a listed company, right? They have the board resolution, the employment contract, the procurement contracts, right? So back then, they decided to use DocuSign across all 6 departments that like really like help them like to streamline the process, and they can still expand and operate efficiently, right? And yeah, so today I think because of the time, right, just want to highlight like DocuSign. We're not just doing like e-signatures, right? As a company, we spend a lot of R&D, so we have a lot of like unique features that is unique to our platform. Like we focus a lot on like the mobile signing experience. We have built in like a workflow engine. We also have a lot of those security features that especially those regulated required, especially how can you monitor some like unusual events, so you can trigger alert, right? If there's something's like happening, right? And across, and of course, as an organization, you will have some enterprise applications that you use across different functions, right? Be it for your CRM process, your sales process, your finance process, right? So DocuSign, we have like a more than 400 preview integration across many different enterprise applications. These are just some example of the common enterprise app that probably you are using as well, like Microsoft, right? We have a full suite of integration across Microsoft Teams, their Dynamic, Power Automate, right? In Salesforce, there's a big adoption across a lot of our sales organization. And of course, a lot of our clients are using SAP or Oracle as part of their ERP process, right? And just now I mentioned that we have a lot of clients in the regulated industry, right? So one of the reasons, because we have the strongest security and compliance in place, right? So these are the various compliance that we have across different industry, right? Specifically, like for banks, they'll be looking at like a PCI, how do we protect the customer data? At the organization, at the data center level, they'll be looking at all the ISO. FedRAMP by the US government, right? I would say that like a DocuSign, probably we are like a de facto platform to the US government as well. And of course, like I believe you all will be aware, like GDPR, right? They have a very stringent data privacy regulation, right? So DocuSign, we are also complying to them as well, right? And also we have a lot of organization in the life science using us, specifically, right? They will require like the CFR Part 11. So this is very critical, especially they are doing all those like the clinical trial, the patient consent, all those process, right? As I mentioned, like personally, I work across with a lot of like certificate authority across the region. So we do support like we call the advanced electronic signature or QES, where you required like a higher level of assurance of the signer identity, right? So this is where we work with the different like a certificate authority globally. Okay. And obviously, we have helped so many like organizations to drive their adoption. So we bring a lot of our domain knowledge, right, to partner with our client, right? So today we have different like services and consulting services that we can like partner with you, like to guide you, right, what you need to do and how you can do it, like to be successful in this transformation journey, right? So today after this these sessions. Yeah, we can like have set up a different discussion, right, to address like what are the paper process that you have, and then we can give you advice how we can come in to support your transformation journey. With this, yep, I will hand over back to Naresh.
Thank you, Wilson. Thank you so much. It was quite insightful in terms of DocuSign and what it entails in terms of features. And interesting case studies as well, use cases, which leads us to our final speaker for the evening. As you mentioned, e-signatures is becoming a quite integral part of working remotely across organizations, of expanding into various other use cases and adoption across organizations. And to touch on this a little bit more further, I would like to hand over to Randil, who could perhaps, for the benefit of the bankers and the people from the financial institutes who are joined in, to maybe take us through how e-signatures can be used in the banking sector and how this can streamline workforce and contract management. Over to you, Randil.
Thank you, Naresh. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Right. I think why Bridge wanted to share a banking, example is probably you think that bankers are the culprits, getting customers to sign all these physical documents. But I think overall, thank you for the opportunity for inviting me to talk about it. And I think as the previous three speakers spoke, I will not be going into detail in terms of what electronic signatures and how it works and things like that, because the gentleman gave a holistic description of what it is. I will predominantly try and cover some examples, as well as I will also try and see how we can talk about the actual issue in the banking sector of the digital signature being used. I think firstly, if we look at the current context of the overall sector, I think it's predominantly traditional paper-based processes that the banks are using today. So invariably, it requires a lot of manpower to start capturing those documentation, the storage, courier, inefficient processes, as well as a lot of customer inconvenience. So I think overall, we are looking at a very, very archaic process in the banking sector, as at now. So I think the paper-based process is predominantly there because the signature part is not process, or the electronic signature is not readily integrated into the banking sector. So I think that is where I think that we can start off with, and that is how the impact of the digital signature will come into the whole banking practice. I think one of the main areas is that the digital signature. Moment the digital signature is introduced into the banking processes, obviously all the paper and the physical processes go away. So I think one great lesson, I think one of the previous speakers also spoke about the pandemic, as well as the overall shift to digitalization. The digitalization process, during the pandemic, most of the banks struggle to, onboard customers, get requests, do basic day-to-day transactions, purely because of the signature part, not because the documentation can't be digitized, but the signature part. So I think that is how important and key the digital signature or the electronic signature is important. I think traditionally, wet signatures was a necessity to do a basic transaction, even like a fund transfer. But today, I think most of the banks have evolved into digital electronic signatures, as well as digital signatures in some extent, in some instances. I think overall, the implementation of digital signature, it's important when we look at the future in the banking environment. Example, a thing like onboarding, customer onboarding, today might be very, very, very physical. Customer walking to a branch, signing off all the documentation, and onboarding a customer. But I think the digitalization of the signature has enabled that process to be very, very efficient across the world. And I see that, Sri Lanka also has adapted up to some extent, to a large extent, in the onboarding part. Plus, I think some of the other transactions like, fund transfers to basic documentation signing, the agreements as well. Some of the banks have already adapted, detailed agreements as well to be signed off electronically, which is a great step towards this, and has created a lot of greater customer convenience. So I think the customers also are pushing the banks because they don't compare the banks anymore like a bank. So they'll compare the banking system also to different digital experiences that they get, with apps as well as different other industries. So as a result, they also want the same experience delivered by the banking system, which is driving all of us also to deliver that same experience through digital, by using digital and electronic signature in making that customer's day-to-day transaction easier. Also, I think some of the main benefits of the electronic signature usage is, during an economic crisis like this, I think one key, a common issue, I think for the last month, some people said, we can't send statements, there is no paper, we can't print a mandate, cost is very high. So the things, I think, so cost as well as utilizing our resources to the maximum during these times I think the electronic signature as well as the digitalization of processes and transactions will significantly impact the banking sector, and it will help the sector to reduce a lot of operating cost in doing day-to-day business, including authorizing a transaction, even into corporate banking as well. So so I think, and as well as the efficiency of processes. So I think what we've experienced is that moment we implemented electronic signature and digitized the process, we were able to eliminate a lot of non-value-adding processes in between, which resulted in significant efficiency as well as cost saving in the whole system. So I think that is a key thing that the banks can achieve by using electronic signature, which will in return digitalize most of the processes that we do on a day-to-day basis. If I just quickly, with the time constraint, if I quickly talk about, two or three, use cases, I think I can also talk about our own use case, on the custom onboarding part, as well as, transaction authorization part. So, example on the custom onboarding, we had about 80% custom onboarding happens digitally. There's no paper involved. I think obviously the pandemic helped, as well as it drove all of us, the whole team, to look at innovative solutions to deliver digital signature as well as electronic signature, as well as digitizing the processes. I think just a benchmark is that when the physical process and the physical signature was taken, I think we used to minimum account opening. If it's a basic process, it takes about 48 hours to complete signature scanning and archiving and things like that, which happens in less than 10 minutes now. So I think that's a significant impact that can be achieved through electronic signature and digital signature, and resulting in the whole automation of that, and the cost saving as well as the the customer convenience has been significant. So which has also helped us as an organization during these times to make our processes efficient, make our staff more enabled, to get the actual result, the final end consumer also to have a great experience. Also, I think Mr. Fernando spoke about the organization locally as well, who's certified for the digital signature. But I think a use case called JustPay, I'm sure that some of you guys have already heard about JustPay. I think so that platform is also on a digitalized signature where you can add any other account from any bank into a digital banking platform. A platform like any digital wallet platform in Sri Lanka. So I think that is already implemented in Sri Lanka, the electronic signature and the digital signature part, to make the customer convenience, and the whole journey of doing a basic banking transaction locally. Finally, I think the acceptance by banks in terms of accepting electronic signature and encouraging that to be used by all areas. I think as Mr. Fernando and Revan both spoke, the legislation is ready, and I know for a fact the people are ready. But I think the banks and the decision makers are still reluctant up to some extent to go fully digital. So I think that is primarily due to the fear of the unknown. I think people are used to wet signatures, a physical document being in front of them. So I think the people behavior, people are very comfortable when you see person face to face. So I think that is something that we overcome that through education and and starting off small. I think those are some of the main challenges that we face in adoption. But the customer's point of view, everybody has accepted that very open-minded, and because it's very easy. Today, anybody can open an account from home without even visiting any of the branches. But I think on the acceptance part, the CBSL also has taken the step forward in coming out and endorsing the whole digitalization of the transactions by the non-face-to-face customer process, which was done in 2020 and redefined in 2021, where you can onboard customers, can do transactions without seeing face-to-face. So as a result, enable most of the banks to start implementing digital signature and electronic signature across their transactions with the customers. So I think with the time frame, those are some of the main thoughts that I wanted to share today. And I think globally, example, if you take countries like India, even closest neighbor, I think most of the transactions now are done through e-signature as well as electronic signature. But I know for a fact that the legislation part, Mr. Fernando and all those senior people are also involved in setting up some of that. But I think we are a little bit late to adopt 100%. But I'm very happy about the progress that the government or the Central Bank of Sri Lanka is supporting the banks to do and pushing the banks to do, as well as all the banks are also now looking at innovative approaches with e-signature to during times like this, it will help massively to all our organizations. So I think those are some of the key thoughts that I want to share today, and I'll be happy to take any questions during the Q&A session. Over to you, Naresh.
Great, Randil. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those insights. It's always nice hearing it from somebody who's using these kind of technologies and who is facing it both from an internal perspective as well as from an external customer point of view. Thanks so much. So thank you very much to all the speakers. I think we should have about 5-10 minutes for a few questions. I would like to open it up to anyone. Feel free to jump in and add your thoughts. Just to touch on perhaps what Randil was talking on, the acceptance of e-signatures and it being used in the banking sector. This is probably to Mr. Fernando and Revan. The notion is also there that e-signatures or any signature which is signed electronically or digitally placed signatures, that the customer needs to have a copy of it saved within the premises. Right? Whenever we talk about the agreement cloud, which is something that which is part of the discussion as well, because most of these software service providers, these solutions are based on a cloud. It's hosted on a cloud. How is that looked at upon when it comes to the legal aspect of it, Mr. Fernando? Are documents allowed to be stored in cloud, in private or public clouds, or should a user specifically have a copy of that document, or should it be on-premise within the premises of the institution?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Naresh. Maybe I will give a bit of a holistic response and give a couple of legal provisions that can be cited to support what I'm saying, and then let Revan also touch on some aspects here. On this point about ensuring that those digital records are maintained, I think it's important to understand since Sri Lanka adopted an international standard for through this Electronic Transactions Act. When we look at some of the key provisions like how to ensure legal recognition for a digital version of a writing, right? How to ensure legal recognition for a digital equivalent of a
document that has to be ensured some degree of originality, so that it can be, presented before court in that form, right? One must understand certain underlying principles borrowed from that international standard that have now come into our law, been there for a long time. And as my colleague from NTB quite rightly said, the law is there, many people are ready, but policymakers and decisions makers are taking time. It's up to the leadership and others to drive it, but the provisions are there. So to illustrate in response to a very specific question, the digital equivalent for writing, the requirement in law is to make that digital equivalent of a writing available for subsequent lookup. In law, we call it available so as to be accessible, to be usable for subsequent reference. So in other words, that document has not been erased, but maintained for reference later, right? That's important fundamental principle stemming from the concept of functional equivalence in the international law standards that have been brought in here. So that is one principle. In relation to ensuring originality, now people keep asking, okay, you scan or maintain, or you create a digital record, maybe a banking digital mandate, maybe one example. A digital mandate would have the same standard as a physical mandate under the Banking Act, because the Banking Act has not been ousted by the Electronic Transactions Act. Both can be read synonymously, and then digital mandate can have legal validity under the Electronic Transactions Act. But the laws, other banking laws, including FTR and other rules, may require the original document to be retained. So how do you ensure originality under our electronic transactions legal regime is spelled out in another section in our law, which requires, again, that principle of available for subsequent reference and to ensure integrity for that information. Now, ensuring integrity for that information can be ensured if there are methods, ISO standards. Our colleague from Docusign spoke about ISO and other GDPR plus PCI DSS standards that they are complying with. If some technology method is used to ensure that those minimum standards are used to maintain integrity for the information of a data message, electronic document, electronic record, then it would meet the same standard as an original document. So that principle of ensuring that you retain it is well established in our law. Now, whether it should be on-premise or in a cloud is a matter of choice for the organization. That is one important principle in this act. Especially the Electronic Transactions Act, ensures that that we have a technology-neutral frontier for all these digital transactions to be done effectively. There are other laws intersecting, like the data protection law, that would govern certain principles of hosting certain things in the cloud, especially when certain data sets are involved. I will not touch on that. But again, the new Data Protection Act of Sri Lanka is very clear about what needs to be hosted domestically. We can discuss that later if somebody wants to have a bit of clarification. But underlying principles are very clear. The choice is left to the market forces, because we have built into this Electronic Transactions Act the fundamental principles of party autonomy, which is essential for the principles of freedom of contract to remain, especially in an international law context. Right? Thanks.
Correct. Thank you, Mr. Fernando. Just leading from that answer to my next question to Wilson. maintaining the authenticity of the signer or the issuer of the contract. How is this managed in the case of DocuSign? How is that trail kind of documented, Wilson?
Okay, sure, Naresh. Yeah, in fact, I also would take the opportunity to also answer Krishanti. Krishanti asked a question about how DocuSign can back the record, right? So basically, like I mentioned, when during the whole signing process, there are a few things that is happening, right? So to ensure that the whole signed contracts is thought admissible. So first is that we will need to get the signer to give a consent, right, that agree to use the electronic signature or electronic transaction, right? And second is that we have to do authentication, right, so that to prove the identity of the signer. And third, we need to have a full audit trail of the whole signing process for some of the data point that we captured, the name, the email address, the mobile phone number if we are doing the two-factor authentication, the IP address, as well as the timestamp. And fourth is that this whole document, the signed document and the audit trail need to be tamper proof, right? So we apply a tamper proof seal on the signed document so that it is is tamper proof, right? So if anybody trying to hack the document or edit the document, yeah, it will be get detected, right? So with all this in place, right? So we ensure that the document is admissible and comply to the Electronic Transaction Act.
Understood. Thanks, Wilson. And there was, I think, one more question on what are the specification standards defined by UN body for an electronic transaction signing system like DocuSign? Wilson?
Sure, yep. I have to say that personally, I'm not that familiar with UN, but generally, because I've seen a lot of all these transaction across the region, as well as Europe, right? So Europe, there is a specific body called EIDAS. So that one is a pretty large organization that specified the electronic signatures. So basically, they will classify the electronic signature into a few standards. One is the basic electronic signature, right? Which is basically what I mentioned, right? During the whole signing process, there is a very detailed audit trail that we captured. Second, they have something called the advanced electronic and qualified electronic signature. These are typically used for higher regulated use cases or documents that you need to sign with the government, where there is a mechanism that is required for the signer to prove their identity, typically through a certificate authority or an identity provider recognized by that region, right? So in Europe, there are tons of the kind of CA. In fact, DocuSign France, we have an entity there, which is also compliant to EIDAS framework, where the Europe parent country, they're using DocuSign as a CA in Europe as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And one more question from Fayal. I think this one's to Randil. That the banks, there's a lot of implementation on digital onboarding and signatures. How keen is the investment and wealth management and insurance sector progressing on the same? Are e-signatures used for applying for loans, fixed deposits, or even credit cards? So basically, is it used across the wider scope of the banking sector?
Yeah, I think on insurance and and wealth, there are already certain service providers. If you go online, you can buy your insurance, and they use a mechanism on which is called click wrap, which covers on the Electronic Signature Act in consent, electronic consent falls under that. But I think so it's already in progress. I don't want to mention any names, but it's already in progress. And also on fixed deposit, credit cards, and loans and all the stuff, it's already there. And you will see also, those are actually education. Some baggage that the bankers also carry. Example, somebody asks, can I apply for a credit card digitally? They say, no, your signature has to be there. Otherwise, you can't validate whether you signed at a later date on transaction dispute and things like that. But actually, it is not anymore because of the the chip and all the other security features built in. We do not need that whole structure to validate all over again. So example, we will see most of the banks going with digital signature for cards and loans as well. We are already live, but I think there are so other banks also will go for a fact. So that is in line. So it's obviously COVID, then this situation will fast track that.
Brilliant. One more question from Ewan. Thank you for the presentation. From a legal standpoint, when you send a contract using an email or other digital communication method, how can you prove the customer's email in court? If he or she denies it, is there that it's their email? Revan?
Yeah, hi. Good question. Very good question. So let's fall back on section 12 of the Act itself, the ETA, Electronic Transaction Act. It says, unless otherwise agreed between an originator and an addressee, a data message, electronic document, electronic record, or other communication shall be deemed to be from the originator if it was sent by the originator himself. Right. So that's the main limb of law that you need to demonstrate. But the question is, how do you demonstrate this? And that legal burden will fall on the person that needs to prove that contract or that email was sent. So one way of doing that is past emails from the same person. The burden is on the person to prove that to court. So I would say you use whatever's at hand to actually establish that fact forensically. I mean, bring out other evidence to say that it's from that person. Mr. Fernando, have you anything to add to that point?
Thanks, Revan. That was extremely useful. Only point I just want to add is that I think all participants, including our panelist, Revan, also has used this. So I just want to explain one parting point, which I omitted in my presentation. This act is not only about commerce, trade, business, and electronic signatures. It has a very important underlying philosophy, namely admissibility of electronic evidence, including a method of opening the gateways for admissibility. So that is in 21. I have not done a slide on that, so I can't put anything up, but I'm sure everyone and all of us will share the slides with the audience. If you look at section 21 of the 2006 Act, it has a mechanism to open the gateways of admissibility. So taking on from what Revan said, true enough, yes, the plaintiff has to prove sequentially over a period of time. I dealt, let's say, with Revan. I corresponded with him via email, and his email was this, and this was my email. You can maintain those records in that form. But I think what is important is to highlight the fact that in section 21, the admissibility framework is quite much more easier than under the traditional rules of evidence that we had earlier. So there have been a string of cases, and there was a couple of recent ones in 2018 and 19 in the Court of Appeal, where they agreed in principle that the admissibility framework is quite unique, and it is unique in this sense, and this is my parting comment. While the plaintiff has the burden to prove that sequentially I dealt with so and so, and this is what transpired, which led to this contract, and I would like to admit this, so we admit all that information. Now, anybody wanting to deny admissibility of that information contained in a communication, the burden shifts to that party wanting to deny. So we have something in law called a rebuttable presumption in 21, which is kind of unique. We were the first South Asian country to do that. And that section 21 took about 22 months to strategically formulate and draft, going back to the period 2003 to 2005. So that legal innovation, to use Revan's language, provides an opening where the defendant will have to then take a burden under the rebuttable presumption to explain why that should not be admitted. That's the point I just want to make. Thanks.
Thanks, Fernando. Naresh, just have one point to add on as well, right? So, this is a very common a question, especially in the regulated industry. So obviously, especially in banks, right? Typically, there will be a KYC process where the bank or the company, right? They have a representative to validate the customer, the name, the ID, the email, right? So as to have added another layer of a protection, right? So typically in the FSI, we do see that there's a requirement to have a two-factor authentication when they sign a document. So it can be in the form of either PIN code, or we send a one-time password to the signer mobile phone, and all this will be captured as part of the audit trail as the evidence as well.
Okay, great. Excellent. Thanks, Wilson. Thank you, Mr. Fernando. I think we are overshooting by about half an hour, so probably leave it to my last question, and probably this one to Randil. As a bank and as an organization who's been leading in terms of digital transformation, what has been your challenges in terms of implementing automation to this extent? One, both internally, I think from an external point of view, it would have been easier, but sometimes the pain points are more internal. So how has it been for NTB and for your team?
Yeah, I think so. Internal, I think yes, we've had challenges, but I think our legal teams as well as our business teams, worked very closely. As I said before, predominantly on education, as well as starting small. We started with a smaller process, and obviously with the confidence, you grow onto that, and also a lot of sessions with experts, understanding. I think that's how we overcame to be the first bank to automate all that. So now everybody's very comfortable with digital signature. Otherwise, and we started the internal signatures also to be digital first. So, example, all the memos to board documents, everything. I think our board was one of the first boards to go paperless. So those processors, I think, helped us to go there, as well as our overall strategy as an organization. We decided that 2 years ago that we will not need to open any branches, but we will grow the digital footprint through e-signature as well as other stuff. We've not opened a single branch for the last 2.5 years, but this year we are the fourth largest private bank, and the transactions have grown double, and 90% of our transactions happen digitally. So I think those are the key elements to actually get the final outcome, and also on the customer point of view. As Wilson also touched upon, what we've done is the whole journey of KYC as well as the security of doing a transaction digitally. That's what we've continuously focused on. Example, you want to change your email or mobile number. It is as important for us like changing your NIC or your name. So the same security features, all those stuff we built in, so the customer feels confident to do transactions digitally. So I think those three are the main areas that we've enabled that. And finally, the digitally enabled human capital, which is the most important for the staff, the staff of the bank. We've enabled them and trained them. Otherwise, when the customer, all this stuff comes to the branch, he say, no, sign physically. If that happens, the whole process drops dead. So I think so those were the main elements that enabled us to do that. Great,
excellent. All right. On that note, I think we've come to our final few minutes. Let me take this final opportunity to thank all our speakers. Mr. Jayantha, Fernando, thank you very much. I know you're a very busy man. Thank you for setting some time to speak with us today. Mr. Revan, Weerasinghe, I think he probably has lost power again. And Wilson, thank you very much. Thanks a lot for supporting and for being a part of this session. And finally, Randil, thank you very much for those valuable insights. I think Mr. Fernando and Mr. Weerasinghe, you all have opened up a lot of, you brought in a lot of clarity to many questions, I think, which have been circulating in the air for some time. A lot of gray areas on the Electronics Act, Signature Act, electronic signatures, digital certificates, etc., which you have been able to give us quite a bit of insight on. I'm sure we would have more respondents and participants open up to us for further information, and I'm sure we can reach out to you, maybe have a follow-up session on how on any areas that we need to deep dive on. So finally, on behalf of the Bridge team, thank you very much. Thanks to all the participants. This is a series of webinars that we've been having on various different topics. This was specifically on electronic signatures. As a company, we are focused on, as Randil mentioned, bringing a lot of education and awareness into new technologies, advancing technologies which are out there in the world, bringing them into Sri Lanka and seeing how best we can support both from a government and an enterprise perspective on how we can be digitally first and move forward as a nation. So thanks so much for taking time and for being a part of this webinar. The recorded version will definitely be on all our social handles. For anyone who wants it sent to them, we can definitely email it to you as well. So finally, thank you very much. And it's been a pleasure hosting you. And until we meet again, thank you very much, the panelists and everyone joining in. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.